How's it going? Bowman here again with another esports meditation, and today's topic is contracts. And contracts have been in the news a lot over the last year, and mainly negatively in the fact that either contracts were unfair towards players or organizations, and also people breaking contracts either by not paying players or by tournament organizers not paying out prize money and everything like that. So it's one of those things that is kind of a hot topic issue right now, and I kind of want to give a broad overview as far as how contracts works and some of the misconceptions involved with that. I'm not a lawyer, so don't take this as official legal advice. This is just a general guide as far as how contracts work, so that way, if you're a team or a player, about to get into a contract negotiation, it's some concepts to keep in the back of your mind as you're writing up the contract. But ultimately, you want to seek out a lawyer, both teams and players, to make sure you review the contracts. It's definitely worth your money to have that done because there's a lot of state and national, laws between different countries even that will affect the wording of your contract depending on the type of relationship you and the player want to have. So one of the first big misconceptions I want to just get out of the way is esports contracts are not sports contracts. And the biggest reason is because sports contracts have what's called a standardized player contract, which has been negotiated grouply through player associations and player unions for those each respective sports like football and baseball and basketball and everything like that. And there's a lot of things like player caps and tradability and all that stuff that go into those standard contracts, and also the minimum requirements that those standard contracts have to have that aren't in the esports scene. And plus, a lot of the structures in the esports scene don't really allow for that yet. Plus, esports, we don't really have any player associations or player unions to date to even get that type of leverage in order to have that type of standardized contract. So, there's a lot of differences between sports contracts and esports contracts. So I just want to emphasize that esports contracts in their current form are not like sports contracts. Would it be nice for them to eventually get to that level? Absolutely. Sports contracts are very well defined and have a lot of protection for both the players and the agencies and the teams to make sure everyone has a mutual beneficial agreement there. So let's to give a comparison, currently in its form, esports contracts are more like endorsement contracts, to where a player and a team formulate a contract to have a mutual beneficial relationship based mainly on their image and their skills. The players looking to go into an organization to acquire, stability, the image that they provide, some support, whether it's in, equipment or financial support or advertising support or advice to help socially increase their brand. Those are all different things to be contractually negotiated, and the team's hoping to get that star player to just draw more fans and attention because, from a team's standpoint, the more fans and the more numbers you draw in viewer-wise and different revenue-wise and stuff like that, the more attractive you look to advertisers and other sponsors, and that's more money you can draw in. So that's why, like, for example, in League of Legends with Riot's LCS, it's very attractive to be an active LCS team. That's why you're starting to see some dynasties and some team organizations that have been around for a long time because they don't want to lose that type of revenue. Fnatic and like Team Solo Mid and Cloud9, they don't want to end up being regulated and all of a sudden they're out of the LCS because they're probably going to lose a lot of sponsors, or if they don't lose them, they're going to be reduced in the amount of money when those contracts are up and renegotiated. So it's in the best interest of the teams not only to get good players, but to make sure their contracts are very beneficial to those players, so that way they attract the better players. And I'm not just talking financial. I'm talking, beneficial, so that way the player feels confident to where whether they stay or leave that organization at the end of their contract, that they're going to be treated fairly in the long run as well. Example of where contracts used to be. Let's talk about the Riot contract for the LCS for players for them to sign, and one clause in it was basically the what was it called? The player's use and image and everything like that. So let's see if I can find the proper term. Oh, where is it? Player's likeness. That's it. And back in 2014, Riot's clause. Now I want to emphasize this. Riot probably wrote this, and their lawyers wrote this not with bad intentions. Okay. Riot's entire purpose of getting the rights to the image and the voice and the look and the persona of these players was pure to promote and build their esports scene. They only really wanted to use it in a positive way because they wanted to grow their scene. They wanted to grow their esport. They wanted to become huge. They wanted to be more attractive to those larger sponsors so they could get more money and make a better and make the whole esports scene better. So. But on the problem is, many lawyers have looked at the wording of that contract back in 2014, and it was very, very one-sided towards Riot, to the point where basically the player gave up the rights to his image forever. Like, even down to his biological data, which is kind of weird, but, like, that's in the clause. Like, you can go online and look it up, now. They have copies of it on multiple news websites, and it's very all-inclusive to the point where it doesn't say they can't negatively use your image as well. So, like, say you accidentally get caught cheating as a player, or maybe you had a bad falling out where you said something negatively that, resulted in a fine and you're retiring, or something like that, and say you want to become a coach and stay in the esports scene in a different capacity than a player, and all of a sudden Riot's using your image as a poster boy of what not to do in a certain situation. Like, you can't, back then, if you signed that, Riot could do that, and you could do nothing to stop them because you signed your rights away for that. So, that's an example to where, even though I bet you Riot didn't have any bad intentions when they formulated that clause, they, from a player standpoint, it kind of sucks, and it probably needed to be renegotiated. Now, I haven't been able to see any details recently if that image has changed. I'm sure it's similar because Riot still wants to use the images and likeness to promote things, but I bet you, if not this year, the next year, there's probably going to be some limitations on that clause that players negotiate to where, they're only allowed to use it within the split, or maybe, continuing for like a year or 2 or 5 years. I don't know. But that's something as a player you definitely need to make sure you look into. And that's, again, another point that why it's important to have a lawyer read over these contracts, because you don't want to accidentally sign something over that you can't get back, or you can't limit it anyway. So it's important to kind of look over all those things. So we're going to kind of break down the main aspects of a contract and what's all involved with it, all involved in it, and from a player and esports organization, the main points that you want to hit. And there's some great resources on esports entrepreneurial. Where did that go? Yeah, esportsentrepreneur.com, to kind of help you get an idea as far as, different basics and everything like this. So some of these points do come from there. I'll put a link in their website in the description as well. But, the first thing is you want to clearly define, since, obviously as a team, you're looking to contract this player to play a particular sport in the particular pro scene. So the first thing you want to kind of clearly define is services to be rendered. Now, obviously, since this is more like an endorsement deal in the long run, you want to include things in a promotional aspect as well. Some organizations include, that there's required streaming time, that if there's certain team events or organizations, or like there's conferences like E3, and the team decides to set up a booth, that maybe you have to work a 3-hour shift at E3 at the booth. All those things can be negotiated and talked about, but in reality, the main part of it is playing that particular sport in the professional scene in those leagues, and you can stipulate different performance clauses and stuff with that, and that's all negotiated between the player and the organization. And my personal recommendation is to, in this particular part, you want the different clauses in it to be very beneficial, so that way it gives the player the best opportunity to also perform competitively, because ultimately that's their job. That's what they're being, that they're wanting to do. That's what you're hoping to pay them to do. You want to make sure that the contract helps them, grow their skill and perform at their best ability. If you're doing anything in your contract that's against that, you're kind of counterproductive, even from an esports organization side, because the whole reason you want that player is because he performs well in that esports. So asking someone to stream 40 hours a week and practice and compete and show up at conferences and do press events and interviews and stuff like that, that person's going to work a 90-hour work week and get burnt out and probably not perform well, because they're not going to get sleep. They're probably going to be malnutrition. They might get dehydrated because of the long hours. And they're young individuals. They don't always realize how much water you should drink. And maybe they're drinking pop and energy drinks the whole time, and all of a sudden they're stressed out because they have a caffeine deficiency when they're in a best of 5 or a best of 3, and they don't always get their normal amount. There's lots of things to consider when you're formulating the services to be rendered, that you want to make sure it's in the player's best interest, so that way they can do their job, which is competing at the highest capability of their esport. So, but that's the first main thing: services to be rendered. Obviously, the next major thing, which is pretty obvious, is what are you paying the player, essentially? And in today's age, especially in the bigger esports like Dota and Counter-Strike and League of Legends, a salary of some sort should be pretty standard. There's too many organizations offering a base pay, for the contractual period, whether it's a monthly stipend or it's a bi-weekly stipend, whatever it is that you can negotiate, it's fairly standard for that to happen. I think Hayes from CLG was saying that the average North American contract is around about $3,000 a month for Counter-Strike. But some players make as much as $9,000 a month, over in the European scene. And that's because they negotiated that. And part of that negotiation is how popular the player is. Social media can be a huge negotiating tool in this aspect from a player standpoint, because part of the reason, again, why we want to look at this like an endorsement contract, you as a esports organization, you're trying to get this player on your team because of that social media following. There's all the fans that person brings with them that's now going to be associated with your team and your organization, because that player is playing for your team. So paying the player an appropriate amount, knowing that you're going to have more negotiating power on the other side when you're negotiating contracts with sponsors and advertisers, you want to make sure that's important. Another aspects to look at in payment are, if you're going to be, getting limited, image rights of that player to use them, does that player get any percentage of the revenues from anything using their direct image, or from any revenue sources involved in the sport that they're competing in? Because there's a lot of team esports out there, and so maybe part of the negotiation is if they get revenue because and maybe you negotiate with your sponsors, depending on how far your team gets in a tournament, you get so much money from the sponsors because that's more time on air, more time that the logo on the jerseys is being out there in the scene. Maybe the player gets 1% of that or 2% of that. I'm just throwing out numbers randomly. I don't know. That's all up to negotiation, and obviously there's some people out there that are established and some great lawyers that are actually actively getting involved and making a career out of helping these situations. But all those little things from ad revenue and stuff like that need to be negotiated. And from a from the esports organization side, things like streaming revenue. So obviously most professional esports players have a stream, and they're generating revenue through subscriptions and donations and ad revenues. They may have a YouTube channel or a Patreon even. They may have those revenue sources, and some esports organizations even negotiate getting a percentage of that towards them because, for instance, maybe the player, was a little bit kind of an amateur player as far as their popularity level, but by joining you as an organization, say their Twitch stream goes from an average of about 2,000 viewers a day to now they're at 6,000 because now they're on Team Fnatic or something like that. It wouldn't be unreasonable to negotiate a small portion of that person's streaming revenue because of the increase in revenue they're getting just from being a part of your team. Now, obviously, you only really have that negotiating power if you are like one of the larger teams that creates that draw just by a player being associated with you. But that's all got to be negotiated, in those contracts and everything like that. Other little things you want to negotiate probably are accommodations, and this is where the whole independent contractor and employee relations really kind of gets muddled, and you want to watch out depending on what type of relationship you want to have with that player, because different states have different rules as far as what constitutes an independent contractor or what constitutes an employee-employer relationship. Something small as, if you as an esports organization, provide them a gaming house with with computers and mices and keyboards and webcams and all that stuff, so that way they can stream and practice and perform, at the top of their ability. Is that stuff loaned out to the player, or when that contract ends, does that player get to take that computer with them? Little things like that, just that difference. Like in some states, that the player being able to retain that equipment constitutes it's an employee-employer relationship automatically, and not being able to retain the equipment and it's on loan and the esports organization retains that equipment, could be deemed as an independent contractor. And again, it's a collective for these differences of a bunch of different questions and rules, so it's not just one point and everything like that. So you want to make sure when you're doing these negotiations and forming these contracts, you make sure you're also clearly defined with your wording what type of role you want to have. So, but say, Team Liquid gets a sponsorship by Logitech, and they get, mice and keyboards and headsets to use at home. And, whether or not Team Liquid has a gaming house for the different sports, that matters. So, like, as an organization, if you are sponsored by Logitech to provide your players with these equipments, it's up to you if whether or not you're going to give them away for free and let them keep it, or if it's on loan, so that way if the contract terminates, they have to return it. And, that all makes a difference in your negotiations as far as what you're going to provide and everything like that. Another thing to consider is accommodations. Tournaments are happening all over the world, especially in your more circuit-like tournaments like Counter-Strike and Dota, where, there's lots of travel involved, there's hotels, there's food, there's entertainment, all outside of the tournament that needs to be considered. And some tournaments, if you qualify for the tournaments, take care of some of that, and some tournaments don't. And so as an esports organization and as a player, you want to negotiate ahead of time the details of those cases, because, like for example in the LCS, where, every single match is in the same location every single week, it's a little less expensive to provide, a vehicle to transport players to and from the location. But it also depends. Do you have a gaming house? Do you not have a gaming house? Do you have a physical work location that people commute to and then you transport them? Like all these different things have to be negotiated in the contract, because it can get really expensive for both either the player or the organization. But it just depends on how much money is being put into the different areas. So accommodations like that need to be negotiated as well. Another thing, people don't think about is actually discipline and rules, because, everyone wants to talk about the money, everyone wants to talk about the benefits and the free stuff and the travel and all that stuff, and that's all exciting and great for the esports community. But at the end of the day, dumb stuff happens, bad stuff happens, players, fall out of their skill, or maybe they have an injury that they can't recover and it's mid-contract. So there's got to be rules and discipline and basically points in place that would cause the contract to end early, and the stipulations that would guarantee the player certain say if they have an injury or something like that that prevents them from competing. Little things like if you're there in a gaming house, do they have so many weeks where they can still reside in the gaming house? Are they able to renegotiate their contract, for a more promotional role? Are they able to? Do they still get paid? For a portion of the duration of their contract, if something like an act of God prevents them from completing their contract. All those little details. Like if they break the team rules, if they break the law, if they use illegal substances, if they break the tournament rules, if they're caught cheating, like all of these things need to be clearly defined, and the punishments need to be clearly defined in the contract, so that way when those cases arise, you're not stuck going, I don't know what to do. Can I fire him for this? We didn't put it in the contract. So like making sure you take your time and clearly define what the discipline is and what the falling outs are for if a contract needs to end early. It matters. And from an esports organization, you kind of want to make it a little bit easier on your end to end a contract than it is for a player to end a contract, because you want to make sure there's limited non-compete clauses for the contractual period. You don't want to extend that non-compete beyond the limit of the contract. You're going to run into a lot of legal issues and stuff like that. And you also probably want to have trading clauses and buyout clauses, for your contracts, whether the player can buy out his contract or another team can buy out the contract. Are you, going to be able to sell that player's contract to another team, and then they have to, finish the duration of their contract with another team? Are you going to, as a player, do you want a no trade clause put in there? All these little things that need to be clearly defined in these contracts when you're going forward, to make sure that if, a situation that you hope doesn't happen arises, you have something in place to take care of it. So there's other little things like what is it? Like we talked a little bit about team promotion and stuff like that, and that falls under player likeness and obligations and stuff like that. So medical information is a subject that I recommend the player doesn't have to disclose information, because once you start disclosing medical information, is like if they have a certain illness and everything like that, and they're in their gaming house and stuff like that. I mean, pretty much if you have a gaming house where people live in, you're gonna more than likely fall within the employer-employee relationship anyway. But basically, if you do have the player disclose medical information, you're going to have to make the contract an employee-employer relationship in pretty much all states in the United States and in a lot of other areas. So it's important to kind of cover those points. I recommend, maybe just a word of mouth saying, hey, I got asthma, but at the same time, I wouldn't go as far as disclosing everything from a contractual side, because it just... more than likely you want to form an independent contractor relationship, and in these situations, because it's easier to set a time limit on an independent contractor relations contract than it is for an employee-employer relationship. So you can set 3 months, 6 months, a year on those contracts. You can say, where I'm going to contract you from now until, say April 3rd, if it was through the end of the MLG major for Counter-Strike. It's easier if you word your contract like an independent contractor in order to set those limitations. So, last thing, real quick, renewal clause is important also, because, say your team's doing really well, having a renewal clause in there, whether it automatically renews at the end of the contract or the player needs to give like a 60 or 30-day notice or something like that before the contract's up, if they want to be open to additional offers outside of it, outside of your company. But there should be, if you have a good relationship with that player and they're performing and everything like that, as an esports company, you want to make sure there's a very beneficial renewal option. And more than likely, especially if they're benefiting and that player's winning for you, there needs to be an option also to renegotiate that contract and not just an automatic renewal, because year over year or that contract period over contract period, if that player is also winning a lot more, and they're on a hot streak, they may want more money, and you may be getting more money because of their also increased popularity. So it may be something to negotiate as far as that's concerned at the renewal period. So, that's kind of a basic as far as your player organization and esports organization contracts go. There's a lot of different other contracts between team organizations and sponsors, between teams and developers, and players and developers, and streaming services like Twitch. You want to make sure you understand the rights and regulations around what you stream on websites and on Twitch and YouTube and all that stuff like that. It's important not to break any rules and to set the correct guidelines. And like, for instance, something that Riot initially had in their contracts, but then they took it away, which is a great thing, is they initially prevented people who were in the LCS from streaming certain games on their banned streaming list, because they were trying to prevent them streaming from competitive gamings. And they revised that, which is great. What they put in place is still whatever, and it may not hold up in court if it was ever taken to court, but it's better than putting a restriction on what players can play on their personal stream, because it's kind of a reach as far as how much control you can have over a person and everything like that. So another thing you want to talk about, this is a good point, because there's also sponsors and advertisers relationships with the player. A lot of times, as people are going in the esports scenes, they've negotiated individual sponsorships and advertising deals before they've joined that esports organization. In your contract, do you want to negotiate whether or not they are able to retain those, whether or not they have to discontinue those, and also the fallout to that if they've already signed pre-existing contracts with those sponsors and advertisers, and maybe you have a clause that says you're allowed to go through retain those sponsors and advertisers through the duration of the already signed contracts, or continue allow, since that's on their personal side, allow them to develop their brand and image. A good real athletic sport example is like Michael Jordan and Nike Air Jordans, right? Everyone knows the iconic Air Jordans, but that's a deal that, because of Michael Jordan's popularity, he was able to sign, and maybe the Bulls helped out with that agreement, also, and had some dealings with it, but ultimately, that was between Nike and Michael Jordan, and the limited image usage for using Michael Jordan on the edge of the shoe. So that way Michael Jordan would get a benefit, and Nike would get a benefit, and obviously that's extended beyond Jordan retiring and everything like that. So negotiating that in your contracts is also important, because you could be severely limiting that person's existing revenue stream if you're too strict with what you're able and wanting to do, because at the end of the day, as a player, you still want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. So I'm kind of rambling a little bit, apologize, but I hope I covered a lot of the main topics as far as contracts are involved. And it's important to really, when you get a contract, to seek out a lawyer again, to review the contract. It's worth the money, because you don't want to be 6 months down the road and you're stuck in a contract that really screws you, whether you're the esports organization or whether you're the player or whether you're a sponsor or anything like that. So I hope this was helpful. Again, link in the descriptions for the Esports Entrepreneurial website. They have a lot of great data for teams and players on there. Do your research and everything like that. A quick little announcement at the end here, just to kind of promote what's going on tomorrow. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 Pacific time, I'm going to be joining the Esports Maybe crew on their Twitch channel, which I'll put a link in the description as well. And we're going to be discussing lowering the bar of entry into esports. And it's going to be an hour-long discussion where we're going to talk about how do we get more people in the esports scene, discussing how do we get non-traditional esports fans watching esports and the promotion involved around that, and also maybe touching a few other topics as we go through the show. I'm very excited about it. I think they're doing great stuff over there at Esports Maybe. Go check them out. I'll link their website and their Twitch page in the description as well. But on that, you all have a great day. Like, share, and favorite this as you see fit. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow.